Hi everyone, I'm Yo and this is Virginia. Welcome to our YouTube channel, Knowing, Caring, and Loving Your Lady Parts. So today we have an exciting video about hip stretches and hip openers. And these muscles are really important. So for anybody who has hip or of course back pain, it affects the whole body, changes your alignment, and of course it affects the pelvic floor. So let's get started. The channel, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let's get started and talk about hip stretches. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to go over some of these muscles so you can see by this diagram up here that the hip muscles are very closely linked to the pelvic floor. So we're going to talk about the muscles in the front and then we're going to talk about the muscles in the back. Girl, you can see that there's actually a hip muscle right there called the obturator internus. Can you see it's right inside the pelvis there? And you can see that it's just right on top of the pelvic floor. So if that muscle is tight, it's really going to pull on these muscles and the pelvic floor won't work well. So that's called the obturator internus. But we're going to talk about the hip muscles in the front and the back, and I'm going to give you some very simple stretches that you can work on at home. So I'm back here in another location by the river, but it's gorgeous here. And hopefully it's not as busy, but it's so gorgeous. So remember, what we want to do is stretch out all the muscles around the hip area. And we've got the front of the hip joint, which is going to be called the ILIOPSOAS muscle and the quadricep muscle. And then we've got our rotators or hip. This one inside is called the obturator internus. And there's also ones, if I give you more of a frame of reference, here's the pelvic floor. Let's stick it back in here. So those are the pelvic floor muscles, remember? So you can see how that muscle is right on top. And then you've got some deep hip rotators. And you can see that in the diagram above that we're gonna stretch, at the back. And that's like the piriformis and the gemelli, brother and sister, I call them, superior and inferior, and some other muscles here. Most people know the piriformis because the sciatic nerve goes underneath it. So sometimes you can have symptoms like pain down your leg. They call that the piriformis syndrome, but I'm not gonna go into that. So anyway, have a look at the diagram up above with respect to the anterior rotators of the anterior part of the hip, and it'll show you some of the muscles here, and also you'll see the rotators of the hip or the deep muscles. So you can see how the hip is really related to the pelvic floor, and also of course on your back and your hip, so it's important to stretch those out. And remember, this is not just for people with pelvic floor problems. This video, if you have back pain, you want to make sure these muscles also are nice and loose because that can pull on your back, and also of course for your hip. And the hip affects the knee and everything is related. So let's go and stretch the muscles around the front. So the one that I want to focus on today, so I'm going to go is the quadricep muscle, the rectus femoris, but anyway, the front of the leg, and then also your hip flexor, otherwise known as the ILIOPSOAS or psoas muscle. So when you're stretching out the hip joint, remember the ILIOPSOAS is in the front, so we want to do this posterior rotation of your pelvis, okay, when you're stretching. So I love this stretch. You can do it standing, but let's do it in this position here. Virginia's having a little lie down there. Okay, so you're going to stretch out the left hip flexor here. So you want to make sure you're tilting this pelvis posteriorly. So if I take Myrtle here, you're tilting it this way, and you'll feel more of a stretch. If you go this way, you won't. So tilt it posteriorly because that's where basically it attaches. So you're getting this posterior rotation, and then you could even just stay in this position and you can change different angles depending on where you want to stretch it. You can go a little bit forward, but you really don't need to do that when you're stretching out your hip flexor. You can, but sometimes even just tilting it this way will give it enough stretch to stretch in front of the hip flexor. Okay, so that's the ILIOPSOAS muscle, or sometimes people call it the psoas muscle. If you're doing it standing, right, you're in this position here, you're tilting it forward like this, okay? So if you've gone running and you can't lie down, it's not as convenient, then you got that tilt again posteriorly in this position here. One of the hip stretches that I really like is a yoga one. So it's the pigeon stretch, and it actually will be the one that we're going to use to stretch the rotators too. Okay, so the pigeon stretch is great because it'll stretch the front of the hip flexor. So let's go over that now. I often go into a downward dog position first. So let's do that. And of course, if you don't want to go in a downward dog position, you could always start and then just bring your leg forward. So I find it actually works well going into your downward dog, and you hold it up, bring it through, and you're in your pigeon. Okay, so when you're in this position here, what you're doing is, this is the hip flexor in front, okay? So you want to shift your weight over to the left side, come up on your fingertip claws like this, okay? So your chest is forward, and you will feel, and I feel this, a nice stretch through the front of your hip, okay? So if you're leaning towards the bent side, you won't feel it as much, but if you lean towards the left side and come up. So this is a great hip flexor stretch, and I love this because you can do it in combination of stretching for the hip rotators. And actually, let's talk about that since I'm in that position, it's easier. So remember I talked about the hip internus muscle, which is in here. This also helps to stretch the piriformis, which is a muscle I'll show you in a sec that goes in your butt. When you're in this pigeon position, just slowly go down, and you're in this position here. And then this time you want to roll towards the bent side. So you're stretching into the deep buttock and those rotators of your hip. Okay, so that is the other part of the pigeon stretch, to stretch out your rotators, which are really deep in the hip, which can really grab on the pelvic floor. And you can see this one here, right there, okay, which is that hip internus muscle I showed earlier. And then when you're getting out of this position, you can certainly do it like this, or I love it, so I just go in this position here and then come out. The other way too you can stretch the piriformis, that a lot of people know too, is you can straighten your leg out, make sure you're nice and tall, okay, and then you rotate, you're pulling. This is what you really want to do, is pull this leg in and get that rotation till you feel a deep butt stretch. And that piriformis muscle is the one that goes on the inside of the tailbone and comes out towards the femur, which is the big thigh bone. I'll show you that in a sec. Okay, so, and then as you exhale, you would pull it in more towards you, this part. So make sure your back is straight and you're pulling the knee in towards you, so you're getting a bit of rotation of your hip. So that stretches out the piriformis muscle. And a third way that you can do it, that I find people sometimes do it if you're lying down, we're going to stretch out this one. You cross your leg over, reach through the leg, okay, and then you're pulling this leg in. The key thing though is that you're using this elbow to take this knee out to the side, so as you pull the leg in, okay, so you're getting as much rotation as possible of the piriformis, because the piriformis, and sorry, the sun's shining right in my face, is also an internal and external rotator, sorry. So it does a little bit of this, okay, which is external rotation, and a little bit of this. So when we're stretching out the hip rotators, so we've already done the pigeon stretch, the other thing I like to do is this windshield wiper thing. So you're getting into rotation. So the hip rotators, often they do either internal rotation where you rotate in, or external rotation. So if you look at my hip, this is called external rotation. I've got to balance this because I'm going out, and this is internal rotation. Okay, so the windshield wiper I really like because you're stretching out the rotators of your hip into an external and internal rotation sort of flow. So check this out. So what we're doing here, you start with your knees up, and then you go into like a windshield wiper to warm up, and then you could just hold that there. Okay, the other thing is if you put your leg here, and this is an extra for you guys, this stretches out the iliotibial band that is often tight, but we're not really talking about that much today, but you can add that, and that's really nice. I find that stretches really well. It's on the side of the leg, and often runners will have this pain, and it can definitely pull on the pelvis too, and you get pain. So just going back and forth like that will also stretch that. And of course, with stretches, you want to hold at least 30 seconds, even longer if you warm up to about a minute, 2 minutes. I love the yin yang sort of philosophy of yoga where you're increasing your connective tissue, so you're holding it a bit longer, at least 2 minutes. So the last stretch we want to do is your quadricep muscle, which is the muscle that goes in the front here, and that can pull your hip forward because one of them attaches to your pelvis. Okay, so again, try to initiate your pelvic floor because this will work on stability, which is great because you do two things at at once, okay? And stabilize on that right leg. We're gonna stretch out the left side, and then you're gonna pull this leg back. And again, if you tilt your pelvis forward a little bit, you'll get more of a stretch than not tilting it, okay? So you're stretching out the quads, which is at the front of the leg, and then you can bring it back a bit. And if you want to get really fancy, go into a dancer's, which we're not going to go, okay? So again, stretching out the front of the leg, tilt your pelvis forward so you get a little bit more stretch. You can also do it on the side, but I prefer to do it standing, and then you're getting stability on that other side. So we want to also stretch out the back of the hip joint, and we've got the hamstring muscle, okay? Which is the opposite muscle to the quadricep femoris, which I have gone over. And that attaches to the ischial tuberosities, which are these here. So you can tell that how it would affect also the pelvic floor. So you want to make sure that you're stretching it. And the big thing when you're stretching the hamstring, don't round your back because it attaches to the pelvis here. If you round your back, you're not going to get as an effective stretch. So you want to stay nice and straight, maintaining that curve of your spine. Okay, so I'll show you different alternatives. So if you're lying down, what you can do is the forward bend yoga stretch. Okay, again, maintaining that curve of your spine, remember, because it attaches to your ischial tuberosity at the back here. All right, and you're bending forward, and you can grab, even if you even just do this, you'll feel a stretch already. And then of course, you can grab your foot if you want a little bit more, and then as you get more flexible, you go down a little bit more. But maintaining that curve of your spine because it attaches down here, okay, to that ischial tuberosity. Okay, so stretching forward like this. And of course, if you want to bias, and this is a little bit more detail that you probably need, there's hamstring on the outside and the inside, the medial and lateral side. You can turn your foot one way or turn your foot the other way depending on where you want to stretch it, or just keep it in the middle. So if you've gone for a run and you're outside and you don't have a spot to lay down, you can just grab something, I don't know, like a fence, but I'll use this stool here. Bend forward, keep your back straight and your knees straight because it attaches below the knee, and then just go forward like this and hold the stretch. So that's a great way to stretch your hamstring. Of course, you can do it lie down too and pull your leg up, but I'm not going to show you that one today. All right, third way that you can stretch out your hamstring, why not? If you're lying down, you just don't want to stand up or sit anymore, lie down, and of course, pull your leg back like this. Okay, and keeping your knee straight again because it attaches below the knee, and pulling it back like this. So those are 3 ways to stretch out the back of the leg or the hamstring muscle. So thank you everyone for tuning into this video about releasing your hip and the muscles around that for back pain, hip pain, and in particular, of course, for pelvic floor pain. And please hit the subscribe button and share with your friends. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear a comment below. Please tune into the videos when I release them with respect to a flow, a yoga flow that'll go through a lot of these stretches all in the flow. And of course, I'll go probably into a little deeper detail about rolling with a ball. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in, everybody. And Virginia and I hope to see you soon.